Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're returning to the data landmine again. And we really do need to take it seriously, guys. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and spokesperson for Baldies for Yes, Martin, I believe.
Yes, we are Baldies for Yes, and you are Baldies for, or you are Yes for Red-Faced person.
Oh, yeah. I walked from the car to the front door and I got sunburned. But much more importantly, I'm delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by Barrister, data protection consultant and all-around data guru, Ada Gregory. Ada, thank you so much for coming over on this sunny day and slumming it in this little room. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.
And it's I know we have actually tried to make this a public issue, and we've seen this week where things have there have been some wins. You know, the RSA have announced that they're no longer going to have a mandatory but compulsory criteria for the driver's license requiring the PSC card for applying for it.
And it looks like the theory test is there. It's not going to be a mandatory requirement for the theory test. Go me.
Data minimization guru.
I think Simon McGarr is on Twitter doing cartwheels, but I'm not going to. You take the credit all you want, Martin. But we can talk about it in those terms. It just shows you how idiotic we've been in terms of data protection in this country, that we didn't even, the state tried to implement something that there was no legislative basis for, and now we're what are we? Oh God, we're 2 days away from GDPR.
D-Day.
Yeah, D-Day. And we still haven't got any, we look for exemptions, we haven't got them, we've had to back down from that.
The bill isn't through yet. Yeah. And the changes have still been made to the British bill as well. I think there's 8 or 9 countries in Europe that actually aren't prepared with the actual framework. So the bills that had to be changed to accommodate the electronic changes in GDPR, they're not actually passed yet. So GDPR is going to come into effect before the actual acts are enacted by government. So, it's a bit shambolic.
Now, it's not like they haven't had lots of notice. This has been flagged like years out. This is coming. Like they've had plenty of time to get ready.
It is. And it's a bit like the biometric confusion that's going on as well. That whole area, if you look at sort of, the European Data Protection Commissioner, he issued an opinion there recently. And he actually mentions the difficulties with data protection and biometric information. And I suspect that the state here in Ireland, we're trying to anticipate, a centralised visa biometric information and prospectively into the future. And they kind of jumped the gun and maybe, accommodated for it in government, but it was just brought in by, companies like the RSA to sort of too quickly, before there was a proper framework in place.
Well, a quick question, and we're all going to ask this question. Is the photo on the PSC card biometric, or is it not?
Well, yeah, probably, yes. It would be, as far as I'm aware. I don't know. They're not going to use it. I'd say what they're going to do is they're going to have to get rid of that aspect of it altogether and actually just use passports, I think. The biometric passports that you're now using, the driving licenses, I don't think so.
The passport has been the go-to piece of ID for years, and it has been.
It has to continue, because I think that's the only official document that they have that's definitely, it's harmonised across Europe. It's all biometric information. So that's probably what they're going to use in the central repository that they're talking about.
Well, that makes total sense, but there was. I want to say willful ignorance on the part of ministers who were involved in this, when they actually issued statements where they were told that the EU had said a picture of someone's face is biometric data in a ruling, and they said, well, I don't accept that. And it was like, oh God, don't you just because you don't accept it doesn't make it right. And we have so. And
some photographs are biometric and other photographs are not biometric. So it's, like if you have to have a picture taken for something, it's not necessarily a biometric photograph. It has to be taken as a biometric photograph. So it's, and the actual, I suppose the accuracy of biometric information is a bit worrying, because if you have any kind of surgery on your face, or even if you change glasses, have different eyewear, you can
Can that throw out the biometric?
Yes.
I've seen now there's a Japanese chap who's who specialises in this face painting that confuses biometric cameras. And it's very odd. It's like lines and dots on your face.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
And a biometric camera can't pick you up.
Yeah.
It just confuses the biometric camera.
It does get confused. It's not a fail-safe. People think, oh, biometric, yes, definitely. No.
Well, I was listening to Bill Hicks the other day. So Bill would have been a favourite comedian of mine, and he was talking about biometric data. And he was saying that, somebody steals your biometric data. You can't just go into the office and say, look, take off my face and give me some new fingers.
I just had a nose job. Can you change my photograph? Yeah. You can't. There's no process in place for doing that. Yeah. And it's true. I mean, people have facelifts, and nowadays they have all kinds of surgery, or you might have been in an accident. Where's the process for actually renewing that, or, where it isn't accurate, sort of to contest it? There isn't. So it's galloping ahead without any kind of regulation. It's the same as what happened with Facebook and everything else. It all occurred before there was regulation.
Actually, we had Facebook tell us, a couple of years ago that we're just a platform. We're just a platform. And then a year
It's very disingenuous.
Yeah, it was totally disingenuous. And they kept maintaining that all we're doing is just putting these things out here. Slowly but surely, they were forced to admit things that as evidence was brought out, but like literally deny. And then it was, well, actually, there was these 45,000 Russian bot accounts. Okay, we did take money from these people with links to...
But isn't it strange that Facebook has been more transparent than the Irish government? Isn't that strange?
The accountability, I think in America, I'd say, sort of the white collar law and blue collar laws would have them. There's more federal offences that they could be, I suppose, charged with if they didn't comply. There's a different sort of culture there.
And I think that's, when you talk about it, accountability, we always go back to it here. You can brazen it out in Ireland. You can brazen it out because even if it's a huge scandal, we can just get it to a tribunal. But if, we can kick it into a tribunal, and then we'll make some findings and recommendations and don't do it again. Yeah. Findings and recommendations are all well and good, but if you see
without enforcement,
without enforcement, it's nothing. And we're great at pantomime or theatre or whatever way you want to look at it, but that's not going to change things. But we do have Facebook, Google, Twitter, they call them the Google Docs for a reason. They just bought Boland's Mill, I think, in its entirety in the last week. They already own most of the property around there. That's not a knock on Google. I'm just simply saying we keep talking about it, reporting on it in Ireland as if it's just a local issue. For example, in the 8th referendum that's been going on, we've had Google saying we're not going to put up any ads, Facebook saying we're not going to take any of the ads, and we're going on as if this is okay, it's going to change the world. But the pressure didn't come from Dublin on that.
Yeah.
The pressure from that came from Washington. The pressure from that came from London. It came from Paris. It came from these people who are saying you tried to interfere in the French election, which Facebook has now admitted they saw that happened. We know Cambridge Analytica scandal is what do they call it? Scratching? Is that the term where they scratch people's data?
Scrape.
Sorry. Yeah, there you go. I'm a Northside dub. Scratching's what I do. But yeah.
Screen scraping. Yeah, I mean, it's not as if we didn't know about that, because there were cases. I mean, Ryanair brought one of the flight sellers to court about data scraping from screens, and so it's been around. I think in Ireland, with regards to the sort of digital giants that we have here, we're sort of accidentally have become in the centre of a storm that we never anticipated. And, people were here, they were based here, the technology companies, because of the corporation taxes. And then we've been left now in a situation where they're now here, and they're so important to the economy in terms of employees, and there's a general fear, I think, about engagement. But I do think that the Data Protection Commissioner's office will become more powerful. But it's a learning curve, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen next globally.
Well, I have said it quite a lot before. They came for the tax breaks and they stayed for the lax data protection, you know. and
mind you, we did have like the Schrems case. That was referred from here.
Yeah,
so.
but the Data Protection Commissioner ruled against Max Schrems in the original. I followed that case from the start.
Yeah, they did. And I think because the problem is that there was no guidance at all. Like the system was very, very new, and there was no official sort of court procedure or no European guidance on it at that time. And, you know, they were looking at the privacy shields and looking at exporting of data, but there was no real regulation or laws around it. So they didn't know how to engage. A lot of people, when they go to court, they think, oh, you know, how did that case not win? And if there aren't laws, the courts can't make up the laws. So where there aren't laws or regulation, they can't say that you're in breach of anything.
Yes.
You know, it's like Anglo. It's not, it wouldn't always be the morally correct thing, but they can't make law by doing it. You can't break a law if there is no law to break.
But if my understanding is right, the Data Protection Commissioner in Ireland works on the basis of reaching an accommodation rather than being the policeman of data protection.
That's it, yeah. It's an awkward horse that they have to kind of stride, you know, because they can only enforce or bring in measures that within the powers that they are allowed to exercise as well. So if there is now, with the European Commissioner, that'll help because there'll be an overall sort of harmonisations of the law and, you know, there will be some kind of a framework for each data protection commissioner in each European country. But previous to that, it was very fractured. You know, at the time that Schrems brought the case, when it was just the old Data Protection Act and system, you know, was less developed, it was a lot more diverse and there was no centralised directives for them to follow, I suppose, you know. So I can't really fault them on it, but it's going to be interesting to see how it's all going to be managed from here on in.
And you're at the coalface of GDPR preparedness.
Yeah.
How prepared are businesses for GDPR? There's a lot of proactivity with regards to sort of people knowing that they have to do it. You know, they've known for a while that they have to do it, but there's general, I suppose, confusion about how to implement it. So the actual practicalities, most people know about it and they say, oh, you know, I am going to be compliant because I've bought a piece of software. And there's a lot of opportunism as well of people selling services. Ancillary and saying, you know, you'll be GDPR compliant if you buy this. There's no one system that you can buy that will make you compliant. That's a disingenuous thing to say. Because, you know, a CRM system is not going to make your manual procedures compliant. Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of disinformation, I suppose, going at the moment and circulating. And I suppose people are making steps towards it, but they're finding it very hard. But in general, there is a last minute panic, I suppose.
And it came up, I think it was yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yes, it must have been yesterday. Yesterday was Monday. Tuesday. No, yeah, it was yesterday, definitely. That data protection went in and looked at a number of hospitals.
Now medical is,
And medical is the big area. Medical is the area where there's the biggest potential for the growth of fraud in the future.
Yeah.
And they went in and they looked, I think, at 20 something hospitals, and their data protection compliance or protection of your data is really, really lax. Now,
there was one staff member who was using it for a health study, I believe.
Yeah. It's really lax. Now, when you take it that there has to be a file at every bed or at every nurse's station, there is a certain amount of laxness that has to be built into it because you're getting taken care of.
It does have to be, the practicalities of it. This is the trick. I mean, people think there's one system that will fit, you know, every organisation for compliance. I've had, you know, clients say to me, is there nothing I can buy from you just to get it out of the way? And I said, no, there isn't, because it's very sector specific. GDPR isn't just, and you have to put it into context. So, for instance, your data retention periods would have to be compliant with the HSE.
Yeah.
If you're medical, for instance, and if you actually do serve public service. So, you know, if you're in marketing, there are certain marketing rules. It's not just standalone. It's very complicated to do. And there's other laws, like charities, for instance, are already regulated by data protection under the Charities Act.
Mm-hmm.
So It is very sector specific, and there is a framework that you can use, but it's not a one fit, for everybody. But medical is certainly, it's very highly regulated.
And it's one that has come into focus recently, where we see that a woman was able to find out that her cervical smear test, what way would we put this, that there could have been an earlier diagnosis. And she found it by simply bored looking through her files, sitting in a hospital one day. That should never arise. Everybody should know what data is held on them. It should be very clear.
You can know. Everybody can do a standard access request on their personal data. Most people aren't aware that they can do these things. It's really about knowledge for the most part. So
it is knowledge, and that's why the transparency is so important to GDPR. It's not about a bunch of lawyers coming in and sort of regulating tons and tons of policy. It's just being very simple and saying to people, this is how you do it, and it's free.
It's free now. They used to charge €6.35 or whatever it was, the old £5 before the euro hit us. But even at that, you could do an standard access request. You could get your data. They can redact pieces if there's sensitive information. But more importantly, when you go down those lines and you open it up to everyone, you'd be damn surprised what's actually held on you by particular companies. And here's where the issue is. Particularly, let's talk banks. So banks can ask for data. They can, and it's not, and under the law, it's not supposed to be onerous. It's supposed to be only specific to the actual application process that you're engaging in. So, you want a current account. Everybody under law is entitled to a current account, provide proof of identity, proof of address, PPS number, away you go. Okay? Mm-hmm. We've seen recently where AIB were under pressure for why they were trawling through people's social media accounts with mortgage applications. Now, again, I would argue that is onerous. That's you're tipping into a different. It's
a whole set of ethics involved.
Yes,
but it's I think the social media, it's like employers now are prevented from doing it. There's going to be great changes around that, around privacy in general, and I think when you put GDPR into the bigger sort of, I suppose, field of privacy, it's really important to have that privacy. People don't realise when they're on Facebook the implications of what they're doing. If you make a disclosure, for instance, or, insurance companies can go in there and have a look. You make a disclosure about your lifestyle and then suddenly wonder why you're turned down for health insurance or for holiday insurance. Yeah. You're disclosing material that will have material effect in other ways on your life. People don't realise the power. I'll give you an even simpler one where if you were backwards and forwards through the M50 toll and you're beeping away and they have an idea of what mileage you're doing. They ask you, then they send you a survey monkey and say, win 3 months free M50 thing if you fill out our survey for us. They know what car you drive, where you're going, what type of, and you're giving them. They know all this data already. What insurance company wouldn't love to have that kind of stuff? That your opinions. There's a whole trade as well with GDPR, and this is something that I have concerns about. Is that the multi-billion-pound business that is behind information and information trading is not regulated. So GDPR is regulating sort of the harvesters of the information and the processors, but it's done nothing to actually regulate the traders of it, which is £1 billion business. I mean, there are companies out there that people have never heard of that are sort of given generic, slightly scientific names, and they are making billions out of trading databases. So nothing has really been done to regulate those businesses, which have been very much overlooked.
Databases are the new currency, the new gold. The bigger, the more extensive, the more detailed the database, the better.
Well, they are, because of the way that industry is being developed, and people, they don't realise things like, AI, all of that sort of stuff. The way that we work, the budgets for the way that we work, our jobs, everything is going to be digitised, and all of this data is being fed into the development of those products. We're going to have to live with the end results. But I think it's the secrecy of the data dealers that I have a problem with, and it's kind of backdoor dealing. It's like when Cambridge Analytica happened, nobody asked the question, did Cambridge University know about this?
Yes.
Like, where's the law that a state institution, that is a learning institution, isn't regulated about running and engaging with big industry.
And I think
where's the clarity and the regulation with that?
It's very good that you point that out, because when you think of the big universities, the MITs, even up the road in DCU on campus, we see private operators.
It's big business.
Exactly, it's big business,
and it's lobbying and it's.
But Richard Bruton invited big business in to talk about education in Ireland. Invited them in to talk to them about what did they see the future for where these students are going to be in.
Well, he gave them input in the syllabus in a way by doing that, which is actually quite 1920s America, to be honest with you.
Well, it's like you're using the facilities of you're going to use the facilities of a university. You're going to use the great minds of the university in order to develop. It's the partnership between industry and university is a very grey one, and nobody has done much to sort of investigate that, and that is at the heart of Cambridge Analytica as well. I mean, it's not as if anybody was sort of trying to hide it. It's just that there was no regulation about it, and there's still no clarity from it. And Cambridge University themselves, who were involved in this, said absolutely nothing.
And got away with saying
nothing.
That's a very interesting point. You're the first person to bring that up, and I think it's well worth exploring in terms of those links, because
there should be accountability.
Yeah.
There should be a list in public that people can see what projects are being run out of what universities.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they're publicly funded.
Yeah.
So, there is freedom of information, but that's not a transparent process to know. There should be a public entitlement to know what programs are being done. I mean, Google's DeepMind program, they were engaging with all the sort of the psychiatry departments and neurological departments and throughout the world. We only knew about that because of, it's sort of come to the fore with sort of weapons and defence aspect of things. But that would have come out of a university. The information that was being gathered, it's like the NHS in the UK, there was 1.7 million records that were given to Google for the DeepMind program. Like, that is patient data.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
And Google are sitting there nice and quiet and getting away with it. And Facebook, to be fair, they're taking a hammering and they're being made to account for it. And there's been regulation being brought in because of what happened. But all the giants are doing it.
Yeah.
And there's failures in other areas, like with the universities, and there should be. It's a public university. There should be a list of the projects.
Well, it should be full transparency.
There should. Yes, there should. And it should be regulated and monitored.
And I think you make a good point, though, because when we had Linehan here a couple of weeks ago, and he cracked this up, and he said, because when the internet was born, he said we were all promised that everybody could be a journalist, and then he said, no, what actually happened was every fucker with a laptop became an op-ed writer.
We're all warriors.
It's like, listen, I'm not going to do any journalism, but here's my hot take. He said, and he's quite right on that. But what actually also happened then is the likes of Google, Facebook, and the big companies, they became the gatekeepers. They weren't the platforms. They
were just, what they were doing was taking advantage of loopholes. These are very, very clever people.
Absolutely.
And they just joined the dots. Where information was free and available, they just wrapped it up and made a product. And that's what they did.
They managed to monetize it.
They did. That's exactly what they've done. But, it's a failure of governments and of regulation where universities are allowed to share this, or state hospitals are allowed to sell patient data, that's not right.
But I think the size of, particularly in Ireland, the size of these companies, how big they have become, that they have, and we've spoken to other guests about this, Tom Clonan, we were talking to about this, they have immediate access to those within government. They can pick up a phone and they can talk to somebody. Now they're steering governments towards the loopholes. They're not saying this is a loophole, but they're saying this is the playground we want to play in.
I actually just think that government is struggling to keep up with these guys. I actually think they're beyond. I think government and regulators and lawyers, the technology that is being developed quicker than the actual regulators and government can keep up.
If you have the best minds in the world,
these people
being paid a lot of money to work out an algorithm that's going to take your data and deliver stuff that things you want to consume, for example, right? And they're working on that. And you're telling me that a guy in Leinster House who's he's just not going to be up to it.
We did see the standard.
It's true. That is a big part of it.
But we did see the standard of where government is at in tackling these issues when Jim Daly suggested that everybody should have to use their public services card to register with Facebook. And you're going, oh my God, what planet are you on?
But there's a lack of fundamental understanding. And I think the context of GDPR and where it's going, I think there's a lot of struggle with this. And they're very clever people and they're acting on a, global platform and, they're digitizing and engineering and modeling data in a way that just is spinning the heads of the regulators and governments, and even things like lobbying and stuff. That's an old way of doing it. And I mean, there's a fear of the state when they get bigger than the state. The state gets fearful of regulating them too, because they're thinking, oh my God, if they pull out.
And it is true that the engine of our economy is largely FDI. It is largely we went from saying that we're over-reliant on the property section to now saying we're over-reliant on an FDI section. We haven't managed to cultivate this.
Very globalized.
Yes. Yeah. And that leaves us completely susceptible to the whims of these people. And I don't mean to say these people, because I'm not saying they're all sinister, Martin. I don't think they're all sinister.
I don't believe it's all sinister.
No, far from it.
In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think
it's the opposite. I actually don't think there's any thinking in it at all.
Yes.
I think there's a disengagement. I think here the way that it's done is if we just kind of leave them alone because they're American and they're giants and they're revolutionizing.
And they're
the attitude, they're cool.
Yeah.
And they're revolutionizing. They're a global business and we should be glad to have them. It's the Irish mentality, and there's a fear of engaging. Even Mark Zuckerberg's, when his testimony in that was sort of instructive. He was telling them, that actually I don't understand the question. I mean, you've seen all the skills of it. Yeah. They're so far ahead, and these are the richest people in the world and the most globalized businesses in the world, and there's a sort of a fear. They've gotten so huge at this point that there's a fear around the world of scaring them off.
But there's two things that we need to realise. The one, it's not Paddy wants his pothole fixed and parish pump politics. It's actually a global thing. Okay,
yes.
It is global. It is global. So, there's we have to understand that the monsters are roaming the paddock, okay? And you can't...
Roaming the world.
Yeah, and they're roaming the paddock, and you can't... there's no point in us saying that they're not. So you have to actually say we need an actual global... There's no point in someone turning around and saying, well, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that they won't interfere in the 8th referendum. No, we need more joined-up thinking than that. If they have joined-up thinking...
They're globalised business, we need globalised laws to deal with them.
And that's what you need. You need to develop a consensus, you need to build partnerships, and you need to actually work it and say, here's something, and you're going to have to actually evolve that regulation as they evolve.
And they are. I think Europe are sort of catching up. We were dependent. A lot of this cloud technology came out of Silicon Valley as well, and a lot of we became dependent on cloud technology because the products that we were being sold were US, and our data had to be exported, and a lot of industry was developed on top of, I suppose, that mechanism because we didn't have an indigenous technology sector. I mean, an awful lot of our technology here is Silicon Valley based, but Europe are moving to actually develop a European cloud to move all of that data back on, whereas at the moment we don't have a great deal of choice. I mean, if we're using Apple products and we're using Amazon Web, that means they're going to be stored or processed in the US. So there aren't alternatives at the moment which are being engaged at a higher level in Europe.
You make a very good point, though, on the national boundaries or borders, whatever you want to call them, because obviously there's no borders. There's no frontiers.
No.
And what that opens us up to as well are the more darker parts where, people's online personas or behaviours or targeting of children. We can laugh at Jim Daly all we want about his idea around the PSC card. Some of the sentiment he expressed is worthy, because we need to understand that, kids putting clips on YouTube of singing opens them up to these ridiculous "go kill yourself" type of comments and
worse.
Oh no, I know, but YouTube will shrug its shoulders and say we're just a platform,
Well, they're doing more in the sense of, I know Apple are very ethical about sort of, they're talking about having a digital identity. And I think the problem with the fake accounts is a big problem because you can have multiple identities and people unleashing the dark forces inside themselves by having multiple accounts. And they know or have an idea how many accounts each person has. There's no accountability for that. That should be stopped. That's open to a huge amount of abuse. And that's
well, we've seen
Russians
some form of self-regulation with Repeal Shield. That has taken a lot of accounts that they considered, and I've seen now, because I've got 4 or 5 this morning, these bot accounts, and they are bot accounts.
They're huge, and I think they're using bots. There's no regulation around it at the moment. So say they close down, the personal data, people should be careful about the data that they, I suppose, disclose online. But there's no regulation around bots monitoring the behaviour of people's online social accounts and engaging with them on that way and collecting data. So there's no harvesting of data because it's not being processed. But if you have a bot and, you want to know about a certain industry or you want to know psychology of buying, you look at a demographic, you can look up somebody's social or Twitter account and say, right, they're this age, they're whatever else, and actually attach a bot onto their account and do it that way.
Oh, yeah.
You can completely circumvent.
There has been an awful lot of bot activity recently, and there has been a huge amount. I mean, I was telling Tony, I was followed by about 100 different bots over the course of 3 months. And I was like, why are they all following? What is it? It's beginning to become clearer now what they were for, but, they were lining up 3 months in advance
of the referendum
and targeting who they were going after.
Or they're studying you, one or the other.
Yeah.
It's the ethics around information and there's a whole global movement of academics that get together and, contributions from different people from all around the world, including the US, about, the ethics of information gathering and the way that it's being done. And this is what I mean about the law trying to catch up with technology, because they just change horses. It's too valuable an industry.
We'll put it back to an SME in Ireland. So there's we'll say just a standard 3 or 4 people working in it. SME in Ireland, they have a customer base, we'll say, of 10,000 people. Where are they standing right now? Are they in panic mode right now?
They're not. I have found, when I'm talking to different clients, they're actually not. But there's a definite lack of clarity. I think directives about what exactly that you need to do to be compliant. There's a kind of a knowledge gap there. I think the data protection commissioners, they are sending out notices about, you need to be compliant and this is how you do it, but not the actual practicalities. It's not enough to be compliant. You have to evidence that you're compliant. And that's a new concept, I think. Tracking and tracing your business procedures, that's really what it's about. Knowing what data that you have, knowing what you do with it, and treating it as if it's your own personal data. That's when I try to explain that to people. And there's an awful lot of different opinions coming in about, how to do this, and we're going to fine you and hunt you down. There's very little about sort of sending out plans. This is what you do. You can use a code of practice, I always tell clients, and that's something that hasn't been pushed. You can go, whatever the sector that your business is in, be it marketing, be it medical, be it industrial manufacturing, you can go to any representative or accounting. You can go to a representative body and actually get a code of practice approved. And that means that the Data Protection Commissioner approves of your process, and you can use that as a standard framework.
You've got an industry standard and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's not being mentioned at all. So why isn't
So each company in each sector thinks it's the only one who's dealing with it, instead of maybe putting heads together and saying, how can we work this as a group?
There are, and for a lot of the professional organisations who are taking professional fees, they should have been in communication with their members, acting on their behalf and engaging with the Data Protection Commissioner's office to prepare for this. And actually saying, there is a framework, we have an approved code of practice, code of conduct, here are the basics, and given a root and branch approach. But as often as not, a lot of the clients have to go back to these professional organisations and then they're told. So
quite often quite often the professional organisations are almost captured by the companies they represent as well. So
yeah.
so there is an element there where if you have...
They could have done more.
Yeah.
They could have done more. And I think coming at it, how to document it in a procedural way, people don't realise from the governance and accountability, risk is reportable at the end of the year. That's under the Companies Acts. So, directors have an obligation to be informed about this. So it has to start at the very top and all the way down. And it's very procedural. The actual procedural layout of it is quite pragmatic, but that hasn't been conveyed in any of the communication, I don't think. There's an awful lot of confusion about it.
And would you think that the vast majority of companies out there, SMEs, are on track for being prepared? I think they have a long way to go to be GDPR ready.
I think once you start, I think they have a long way to go, but it's a moving. I mean, for instance, the Working Party in Europe that only made changes to consent that were quite considerable, and we haven't even had the e-privacy regulations haven't been passed yet. There are 20 pieces of digital legislation in the pipeline. 20.
And where are we looking with this? I'm thinking the amount of pieces of legislation that have passed through the toilet in the last...
European, coming down the line. So GDPR is only just the start of it, and anybody who thinks, if I don't do anything, then it'll just die down and kind of...
So do we need a minister for GDPR?
We actually do. Well, we do have one.
We have a minister, but you got to remember, okay, so we had the it's not all doom and gloom. We had the Data Protection Act that we're all supposedly compliant with anyway. GDPR is a big step forward on a lot of this. People who are data controllers should have been familiarising themselves with this for a number of months. Most institutions, whether it be representative bodies, have been doing some sort of training and courses, or at least data dumps of stuff that people need to reference books and things like that. But at the same time, I think from the general public's point of view, and I want to step away from SMEs and say the reason this matters is because it's what those people were doing with your data now, and it's about, as you said, consent is an important thing now.
Yeah, it's a huge one, and that's only been changed recently. So it's evolving and changing all the time. Europe got this out there, and as issues when they go out there to industry and get the opinions and are fed back, they're kind of saying, well, this isn't going to work. So they're making changes, and it's going to be tapered and changed on a regular basis. So this is why they're trying to bring in a sort of a manual system of management that can be updated and audited on an annual basis. And that's really what it's about. It's trying to automate business process.
What about the company out there that says, don't care? Don't care? What happens to that company? And there are going to be companies that say, don't care. It's not
just even public, exactly. Well, you see, if you have staff, people that are employed will have a right. It's not just a general right, it's also from an employee point of view. So it does affect everybody, really. And I mean, we haven't seen the enforcement aspect of it. I know in the UK they've been stepping away from that and saying we'd much rather engage with companies and we're not the sort of data police. But there has been an increase, and I've noticed there has been a recent increase in the Data Protection Commissioner's office bringing cases about direct marketing. They have been cracking down on that.
And we've all had those emails recently. I think we're all inundated.
I think it's... But do you not think that's a great thing? Because at first it's like a purge. You didn't even realise your data was captured. They're all coming to you now saying, please click on this and we'll give you 50 cents off a cup of coffee in your next... You're going, all right, I'm out of here. They don't have me anymore. They don't have me anymore. The amount of people you disappear from.
Well, there's a chap on Twitter called Andrew Brooks, and I have to read out this tweet because this tweet so got me. He's at TaxPod. He said, in tragic news, I have declined GDPR consent to the company which has been trying to flog me an upmarket swimming pool for the last 5 years, during which time I have lived in a second floor flat. Now that pretty much sums up the kind of emails that we're all getting at the present moment in time.
It is, and I've I find it sort of frustrating. In one way, it's good. If it's done the right way, it's meant to be very simple. And it's like, did you know we have your data? And if you don't agree with it, click here. And most companies are just doing everything they can.
Not to say that.
To give people the option, because they're like, then we'll have no business.
No, they're literally saying to you, they're actually sending you an email saying, we want to enter you in a free draw, and click here, please.
or not even giving you an opt-out at all, which is really offensive. I got one myself, and there wasn't even an opt-out, and I didn't even know they had my data.
I had one that said to me, following a recent conversation with X part, and I went, I never spoke to X.
My phone.
So no.
But it's actually, I mean, I'm taking it as an opportunity to get my name off lists.
It is. It's actually.
It's still a wanted man, Mark.
Depends on the list.
Yeah.
It is. It's a really good thing. I know everybody is kind of panicking and saying, "Oh God," I think we're not used to it. We're not used to compliance. Normally, there's compliance departments, but on a lower grade level, the actual cultural engagement with compliance is not great. But it will be worth it in the long run. I think having business and big business being held to account for the data that they have is a very good thing for all of us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it's a fundamental. It runs into human rights and fundamental rights, and
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
You've been involved in this for a number of years now, and you've seen how data has gone from the periphery to coming into the center of people's thoughts. We've seen it's dynamic now because it's moving. It's actually it's been shown to be able to influence elections. It's been shown to be able to change and cultivate. We always knew advertising worked because there was a reason money was pumped into it, because of bloody...
But the markets, I mean, it's global economies were shoved into recessions because algorithms that were based on the technology of human data actually had a fight. It became a race to the bottom. Data, all of this data is affecting us, and anybody who thinks it's not really relative to my business, I think misunderstands the bigger context in which our society has been regulated and driven, and the way we work, and even how we'll be arrested. Biometric data. I mean, it's in full force. It's not even reliable, and it's in full force in China.
Yes, that's right.
Already at the airports.
Yes. And they're talking about putting it on lampposts and being able to track a person everywhere.
Now, we know we've seen the billboards that could change when they just took a quick shot of your face to say he'll be more interested in what's coming up in the cinema as opposed to someone else walking by, and we'll stick like
they're actually programming now about your chances of offending based on your physical features, on your biometric information.
Oh, I'm screwed.
You too.
Which is like
you're a walking 10 to 12 year sentence.
I hope I'm gone by the time that comes in. But it's so to think you would be categorized from birth. Like if you start getting into eugenics. Biometric information is eugenics.
Yes, but it is. Yeah.
And really the bigger picture of what it is you're categorizing people. You're going to have, it's going to be like the Hunger Games.
We're back to measuring the size of a person's
head. The odds be ever.
Are you going to be sent to a lower grade school because your head is considered smaller than is what's standard? No, I'm really...
I know.
It is serious stuff.
It's really serious stuff.
But the level of ignorance within Ireland, even in what data is, how it's controlled, where it's stored. And we saw it just this week in the Disclosures Tribunal, where a former Garda Commissioner thought that deleting texts somehow deleted text.
That was quite funny. He said I never deleted any text, and then it was put to him that they recovered 272 texts, and he said I'd say there was some texts there all right.
But fun aside, the Garda Commissioner is the data controller for An Garda Síochána. He is the data control. Now, if you've that level of ignorance at the top level, you have to be scared for everything that's down below. You have to be.
You do, and you have to blame higher powers as well of not bringing in the training. You have to bring in experts. This is what I mean about the people that are engineering this data are just lightning bolts ahead of everybody else. But there is, I think in Ireland there's a kind of the front of compliance or the front of understanding, but it's not very deep rooted. You have to put data and this whole data regulation into the broader concept of things and make sure that people are trained. And that's a failure of the guards if that man actually didn't understand it.
Well, you are kind of worried that,
Well, it's legal, 'cause you have to.
what kind of crimes have slipped through the door because because somebody in the crowd says, I delete that text, there's no evidence to get that fella.
But I mean, it's not.
It's scary.
It kind of is, because even with criminal cases, there's legal pathways that, the guards can go to any of the phone providers and get this data. They have to hold it for a number of years for that very purpose.
It's been used successfully with Graham Dwyer
Graham Dwyer, who's appealing.
Yes, yes.
I tell you, I'm going to say something, and God rest that poor lady. And I saw they were trying to crowdfund to bring her body home. And they absolutely smashed it. They had €10,000 of a target. The last time I checked, it was over 30,000 had been raised.
Lovely.
But I heard people start already saying, "Oh, he had a knife and he was in the Dublin Mountains," and all I could hear was Graham Dwyer going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to pin," because this is what happens in these things. Clever. Graham Dwyer is still an architect. He's still on the board. He's still a registered architect. Yeah. They still take his money every year when he sends his license in, and he's still a member.
Astonishing. I'm very surprised at that.
Anyway,
where would you go now if you were sitting in an office? You're the data protection officer. You have 3 or 4 people on staff, and you've done nothing. What would you do now besides ringing you up and saying, "God help me"?
I'd ring your professional organisation. I think a very good steer for smaller businesses, particularly the people that are most terrified of this, are a lot of the marketing companies and genuine marketing companies and people that do want to comply. Engage. If the whole route that this is eventually going to take is certification, so you're going to have a framework in place. It's a very good thing to actually engage this right now. You're going to need a system. Don't do nothing, because the prosecution is going to be even harder if you do nothing at all. You're going to have to get some framework. Even if your information mapping, understand the data that you have and where it goes. And it's an exercise within companies. I often say to them, it's well worth doing because it's an efficiency exercise. Your company might be behaving in a way that's actually not even good for business.
You may have clients on your list that have no longer been clients for...
No, or did you know you're processing in the States? So know about the systems that you're using to support your business and make sure that you understand their policy with regard to data. And it doesn't mean not to use. GDPR is not meant to be preventative. It's just, it's accountability. It's understanding what you're doing with the data and making sure that you map it. And do go back to professional organisations. There are coded practices and codes of conduct that can be approved to make sure that you are compliant in our excellent framework. So
our government would need to start setting an example, though, seriously. Particularly with the public services card, it would need to say, yes, there are codes of practice, there are ethics. You can't just mine data for the sake of mining data. Those days are gone. Yeah,
it's a whole new culture, though. It's a whole new world, and I think that's the problem. Is there's a struggle there's a misunderstanding about the importance of the data, even on a personal level with people. They don't understand, disclosures on social media, what they're doing, how it's going to affect them. Companies try to prepare. Somebody gets a memo and says, "Oh, we'll have to do that," and they kind of throw it in there instead of actually looking at the bigger picture. I think that's the problem here with the public service. And to be fair, there hasn't been an awful lot of very strong direction.
Well, no. Well, there is, but it's coming the wrong direction. It's coming
for the public aspects.
Well, it's coming from the civil servants to the ministers rather than from the ministers to the civil servants.
Absolutely, and the job is meant to come from the top down. Yeah. Yes, it is.
So they're being told, go along with this. It's a great idea, and there is so much data already existing within the state mechanism. Like Elaine Edwards found out that the car she drove was part of a social welfare record, and I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why is it anybody's business? So they already have a lot of data that really and truly, they have no real purpose to hold. It should be destroyed.
It's because there's in the public service as well, there's a lot of conflict between procedures, and there's a lot of fear, I think, with civil servants if we they don't like taking things out of documents. You know, there's a lack of kind of understanding about you can do this and you can't do that. So they tend, I think the Irish way is to kind of have layers of things rather than actually taking things out. People are not comfortable with removing things.
And should we just say we held it for 6 years or whatever the thing is, and that's when we get.
Or we do this practice because it's always been done. Because no one's actually said we don't have to do that anymore.
Well, my gut feeling on the public services card, although you can't prove it, my gut feeling on the public services card is that there is so much data on people already floating around within the state that they needed some umbrella to put it all under to justify what they already have. It wasn't really an exercise in getting more data. It was an exercise in justifying the data they already hold.
I don't know. I imagine it was just an attempt to comply that failed and backfired.
I'm looking for a tinfoil hat.
I just think it was, I think it was a duplication. I think there might have been moves in Europe that were sort of, heading towards an identity card. Because there is a European identity card system. And I think it was the Irish attempt to try and do that, which of course wasn't done very well.
Didn't legislate for it, didn't have the conversation, didn't even have the debate.
No.
And if they'd had the debate, as Simon McGarvey,
fine.
And you'd won, you'd had your argument, you'd won, absolutely, let's roll on.
And there's disclosure about this is why we're doing it, and it's because of the whole of Europe, and it isn't an attempt to sort of restrict movement and, people on social welfare, and it was just badly done.
Oh yeah. But do we ever do anything properly?
No, not really.
It was very badly handled. You need to have the conversation first, sort out the ethics, and then if you get approval, you move forward. If you don't get approval,
transparency about it. We're going to do it, because of this and because of requirements. And there are differences across Europe in the law, obviously, because we have like civil law in most of the other countries. It's only ourselves in Britain that are sort of common law. So it's very difficult to regulate. But I think things were prospectively done here, and people were like, why do I have to do this now? And the government are kind of like, we don't really know, but we sort of someone told us in Europe, so we're just going to throw it in there. And I think that's really what happened.
Yeah.
I
do think too that at the moment...
And the poor have no privacy, I always say that.
The poor have no privacy.
No, they don't.
No. And we wear ourselves poor.
It's an equality issue as well, very much.
It is, yeah.
Mary McAuliffe
always says that the poor are always convicted of poverty.
Yeah.
And
it's true. It's really true. And it's always the people in society that are the most vulnerable, that are repeatedly made more vulnerable.
Oh, well, the public services card was sent out to people who were disabled
first. Martin, it's the definition of coercive control.
First. Yeah. And you had no choice. If you want to keep receiving a social welfare payment, you keep your mouth shut, and this is it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a very specific targeting of those who couldn't fight back. Yeah. Very specific.
And it's a shining example of why we should care about data.
Mm-hmm.
In the broader scheme of things, GDPR
but
is only
I do
very
think
small
that
part of data privacy.
That gathering of data can have a higher purpose. It's not there at the moment.
Very much so.
Well, at the moment, we're using that gathering of data.
We don't even know what data we have. That's the point we're at.
Or who's really the data controller at the moment? Is it really?
And how much data is shared? I think even amongst, I think in government, and the government agencies here, the data sharing that's going on, there's no mapping on a broader scale.
Well, there's the official data sharing, which we've seen, and then there's what I've been telling people about for years and years, is there's a meeting in the car park. That's unofficial data sharing, and that's never going to show up on a record anywhere.
Yeah, well, that's you can't legislate for people talking to other people, okay? But what you can legislate for is when do
what systems are used, like Pulse, for instance.
Yeah.
You don't have user access, you shouldn't be in there. It shouldn't be a choice. Very simple things like controlling user access. Some people can see different levels.
If we can be very, very flippant about it, I think someone in the UK lost their job for going into the NHS's records to look at Ed Sheeran's health records.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if we did it here, we'd probably put it up online and print it. Go, did you see this? He hurt his ankle or something, and it'd get a load of retweets.
But there was actually an incident within the social welfare where somebody was made. For whatever reason, they hit the newspapers, And there was a plethora of people within social welfare who then went and looked at that sort of person's records. And they felt they could have access to it.
Yeah.
There was no restriction. There was no, you're going to be logged as having a look at information that's nothing to do with you.
And I think it was the guards checking out the pulse system.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, if people are not told, or if you can't prove that somebody was told not to do that, well, then it's your fault.
Yeah.
You know, and this is part of what GDPR does, like user access levels into systems and that sort of information security.
But it is
piece
an
of it.
accountability, and anything with that dirty A word in Ireland is just, you know yourself, nobody really likes that.
Nowhere to hide.
It's funny. It's funny.
No hide
It's taken us 100 years to get comfortable saying abortion, but we can't say accountability now.
No, governance.
Oh my God,
It's going to
no.
come in and look.
Repeal the accountability. Oh
Somebody
God.
telling me what to do.
Yeah.
No.
Thank you so much for coming in and
No,
filming
thank
us
you
in
very
on
much.
this. It's interesting stuff, and we'll definitely have to see where this goes.
It will be. You should do a follow-up and
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
see what kind of enforcement and how the Data Protection Commissioner at the office has been now divided into 3, which means it would appear that there's going to be a lot more proactivity going into this.
The office is divided into 3,
Yes, there's going
so
to be 3
they each
officers.
have a wing of the plaza.
It looks like they've got 3 enforcement teams, not one.
You keep talking, and you're just you'll get home one day and they'll be sitting outside your house.
Yep.
No, dude, Ada, thanks so much for this.
Thank
It was
you
a great.
so much.
I think it was a great conversation, and I think people need to wake up. I think we are starting to wake up, but I also think what you've touched on, it's not just a local issue; it's a global issue,
It is a global
and
issue,
it would be well worth doing a follow up in a few months to see how we're getting on.
Well,
Because
a global look at it and see how the rest of the world is coping with it. As
There are
compared
huge
to ours.
changes, even in the States, I think, because of Facebook, I think Americans are saying, why don't we have the same level of protections?
Yeah.
There's now huge pressure in Washington.
Are you
massive
allowed to say
lobbying
to
going
Americans
on.
because you're stupid?
Yeah. No.
no,
Kind of.
right.
They've got Trump.
Listen, folks, we really appreciate you. Thanks for listening. Do hit subscribe. Tell your friends. Someone leave us a review. Go on. Get out there and leave us a review. Send us an email at theechochamberpod@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter @echochamberspod. Thanks again. Bye-bye.